and this is the thing I think about always on these things. Sometimes the worst news out of the way creates a runway,
a buying opportunity,
pun intended for the airline stock, but a runway for this stock to take back off.
Hello and welcome to the Market Moment. My name is Eli Freeman. I'm here joined with David Lee and John Martfelt. We've got some pretty good topics today, going over Japan's historic monetary decision, something that's happened recently but has stemmed from events in the past that my two guests will enlighten us on. And then the Boeing news, what's going on with Boeing. There's been some big shifts with Boeing, and then a housing market update. Seems like every time we talk about housing, everyone gets really excited, and we get a lot of comments whenever we talk about housing. So before we jump in, remember to join the Market Moment community by hitting that subscribe button. It's just down there. It takes you, 0.1 seconds. So the market can go up in a year or two, but it only takes you 0.1 seconds to hit subscribe. So, guys, David, I'll defer to you. What's going on in Japan?
Well, I'll defer to John. No, I'm just we talked a little bit about this on last week's podcast. So if you haven't seen that, I would recommend you check that out. But for those of you who been alive for more than about 30 years or so, you'll remember back in the late 80s and 90s, it looked like America was kind of be eclipsed economically by Japan. They were buying up property left and right, kind of like China's doing today.
Right.
They were buying up property left and right here in the United States, and there was really a lot of concern that, hey, we are, like I said, that the United States is going to be economically eclipsed by Japan. But then, they had a collapse, I think, in the late 90s, John.
Late 90s, 97, I believe.
Yeah.
Was when it all fell apart for them.
And they've never really recovered from that. Right?
No.
And we talked about some of the reasons why. One of the reasons that I talked about on last week's podcast, I think is a fundamentally important reason, is just their demographics, right? They haven't had enough children to kind of continue the economy growing. Naturally, if your population is aging out and dying off, your economy is going to suffer as a result. Exactly. And that's a lot of what the problems have been in Japan.
I think the interesting thing about Japan is that it's a little bit of a case study for China right now. So everybody kind of talks about how China is going to take over. You hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. China's the new superpower. They're going to surpass America. And Japan was on that same trajectory. They were catching up on every level to America. And then, of course, good old-fashioned U.S. capitalism wins again, right? Mm-hmm. And again, I think that's going to happen again with China. But China has the same demographic problem. They are largely older, and they don't have as much youth. And it's very similar. Japan and China, obviously different how they're run and so on. I will go back to Japan. I have been a follower of Japan for a long time just because I'm interested in the world markets. Shinzo Abe was the former prime minister. He was assassinated in 2022, if you remember that. But he was prime minister from 2012 to 2020, and he brought Abenomics, is what they called it. And during his time, he got GDP higher. He got ratio of government debt to national income stabilized, but he couldn't get the structural reforms, so they had a lot of internal problems inside the government. So he actually got Japan closer than anybody has out of the doldrums that Japan had been in, and largely due to, again, a collapse in the currency in 1997, which started it. But I look at this, I know this is a story, and we're talking about Japan, and they're trying to fight out of it, but I look more of this as just how we can link this to the China story today, and how things go in and out, and one thing is always common, and the U.S. always continues to march forward. Mm-hmm. So, Japan's fall, they're trying to get back. They're trying to shift back to being, relevant again, and it's hard for them to do that. But I look more in their history of their rise, and it eerily reminds me of where China is today. Yeah. And that's kind of how I look at the Japan issue. I just compare it to the China issue today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It isn't there yet.
And I do think, like you said, China's going to have the same problems. They already are seeing it, right? Yes. Because they're I think it was called the one-child policy. Yeah. It was literally a one-child policy. Yeah. And I think they also really favored male births and not female births, right? So they've got an issue. Obviously, you can't continue to foster population growth if you only have males.
No doubt.
And if you're only having one male,
I know.
you're gonna have issues.
All they need
down
to
the
do
road.
is read the story of Noah's Ark.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it wasn't one.
That's right. So now I will say, and we talked some about this last week too, that the United States is going to have some of those issues down the road also. The good news is, and like we said last week, birth rates in the U.S. did go up year after year from like 1973 to 1992.
Right. Baby boomers.
The echo boom.
Oh, the echo boom.
Yeah,
Right.
the baby
boomers
boom was
were for
45
that.
to
Yeah, that's
62,
right?
right?
Right.
And then you had the baby bust from 62 to 73, and then the echo boom from 73 to 92, roughly. But then, and so, through the late 2030s, early 2040s, theoretically, we should be in pretty good shape economically in the United States due to the echo boom. But after that, we're going to have potentially some of the same issues that China and Japan is seeing. Hope not, but it's a potential risk that the U.S. faces down the road as well.
Well, not to get off topic, but we keep letting in people we don't even know who we're letting in, so maybe that'll help the population boom, right? I mean, I'm being kind of facetious.
No, absolutely. There is something to that. Obviously it needs to be. We could have a whole other discussion on that. It needs to be legal. Countries should be selective on who they allow in, right? You want to let
Totally agree.
You want to let kind of the best and brightest in.
Every country in the world has those policies.
Absolutely, and it's healthy and necessary to have to be able to control your own borders. But you're right. That is a potential solution to demographic problems.
Right.
Is immigration.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting when you talk about the history of markets is people will talk in America the lost decade.
Yeah.
So the year 2000 to the year 2010, where the S&P 500, if you look at it, it didn't go up. It actually went down from 2000 to 2010. They call it the lost decade because no one made any money if you had been invested from 2000 to 2010. Japan had a 30-year lost decade.
Right.
And that goes to where do you want your money?
Mm-hmm.
And diversification is extremely important. Not just diversifying your investments into different types of companies, but different countries.
Absolutely.
Because there will be periods of time America was down from 2000 to 2010. International did better. In that time frame.
Exactly. And David, you and I lived through 2000, 2010, and we invested for clients. Even though it was a lost decade,
you lived through it too.
Yeah.
You were just like 5 years. You're just like 4 or 5 years old. But he lived through it.
Investment business I was talking about. So, sorry, Eli's 12. So anyway, but our clients, even though that was considered a lost decade, the U.S. economy is still fantastic, and we had two massive downturns: the tech bubble crisis and the financial crisis of 2007, which created the flat decade.
Yeah.
But if you were investing wisely for your clients weren't flat on the decade because you had 6 of the 10 years that were very, very profitable.
Yeah.
And just 4 horrible years, right?
Yeah.
You just had to make sure you made it through that time. So even though the decade is flat, good advisors got their clients through it without, it's different than Japan because Japan has been, like you said, flat for 3 decades, and there has been they have not had any spikes. And it's been a pretty rough time for them for a solid 3 decades.
Yeah. So completely shifting directions, moving into airlines. So airlines I was pulling up different tickers of airlines. Airlines have struggled. If you look at really any airline, and I've got the 5-year history pulled up for Boeing, Delta Airlines, Southwest, and United Airlines. All of them over the last 5 years on their total return are negative.
Yeah.
So over the last 5 years, S&P 500 is up 102.8%. All 5 of those are negative.
COVID.
With the best performer being Delta Airlines down 4% over the last 5 years. So that's
the previous 5 years to today.
to today.
Wow.
As of
And COVID knocked them out for a year.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's just hard to recover from
It's
that.
very hard to recover from that.
When you're
remember
totally shut down.
Yeah, you remember the pictures of the airliners just sitting on the
Yeah.
ramp. That is crazy.
It is crazy. I hope we never go through that again.
Yeah,
God
that was bad decision making, but that's another story.
Exactly.
the cherry on top of that.
Another podcast.
is everyone talks about Boeing. Boeing being an incredible company, one that is positioned kind of as a defensive stock, something that should be a safe bet or a safe investment. And Boeing has proven especially over the last 5 years, to not be that.
Yeah.
There was a time when Boeing had completely outperformed the S&P 500, but right now Boeing is struggling, and their CEO, Dave Calhoun, is actually stepping down at the end of 2024. He's made his announcement. Some of that coming off of they had a door fly off of their airplane while flying.
Yeah, they've had quite a few problems in a row. The most recent one being the door flying off.
Yeah, you can't have missing doors.
Yeah.
I heard
during the
I
flight.
heard a story of someone that was underneath the airplane on the ground, and a phone just landed in their backyard.
Oh my goodness.
They didn't know where the phone came from until they found out that
The door had blown off.
Yeah.
Wow. I tell you, they're really lucky in that incident that nobody was killed.
Huge,
I mean,
huge.
that could have been really much worse.
You know, this is my thought. I've been following Boeing for a long time. Love
You're a
Boeing.
fan of Boeing.
I am a fan of Boeing, and I look at it like this. Okay, so Dave Calhoun, unfortunately, is taking the rap for this, right? I actually think he was doing a good job, and you can't. This is the problem with a huge company like that. He is right. He is taking the fall, and he should. It all comes to the top, right?
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why you get
Someone
paid the big
has
bucks.
to fall on the sword when something like this happens.
Exactly. And this is in a Kansas plant, a Wichita, Kansas plant, where these doors were not, they didn't put the 4 bolts in them. I mean, this is like crazy, but that is obviously important. So there was some kind of check system that didn't work at their plant, which falls on the CEO. Understood. This is my thought on Boeing, and I've been watching it for a long time. They were $440 a share roughly when they had the 2 planes that went down in 2018, 2019, the 2 crashes that kind of crashed the stock down to about 100 a share. It went back up to about 260. Now it's back to 190. And so I've been watching it, and this is the thing I think about always on these things. Sometimes the worst news out of the way creates a runway,
A buying opportunity.
Pun intended for the airline stock, but a runway for this stock to take back off. They will fix this. I am certain.
Yeah.
They are the
They
world's
kind of
largest
have
producer
to. I
of
mean, you think
airplanes.
not only are they a large producer, but you think about them from a national defense perspective.
Exactly.
They're very critically important for national defense as well.
Exactly. And the national defense side, there's no we have not had any reported. I'm sure there could be problems, but there's not reported problems. It's on the commercial side, which are 2 separate, but they're the same company. Boeing is going to be around for a long time, and they'll get through this. It's like Chipotle went down because they killed a few people with the bad stuff, and then is it really Chipotle's fault? Right? It comes from a farmer, and then, but it is right. It falls on them. Stock went down, way down. Now it's 20 times what it was when it fell down. And I believe Boeing will fight back and come through this.
Yeah.
And for our safety and sake, I hope so.
Yeah, I think they will too. I think the fact that he's resigning shows that they're taking it seriously.
Yep.
And he said we've got to. I think in this article that is in front of us, he said we've got to get back to a focus on quality and safety. And I do think that Boeing kind of lost their way for a while, and they were focusing on profits more than safety. The 737 MAX is a good example of that, right? Instead of going back to the drawing board and designing a new airplane to replace the aging 737, they said, this has been such a great profitable airplane. Why don't we just modify it a little bit and, instead of, which is much cheaper than going out and creating a whole new airplane. And that created a whole nother slew of issues for them that caused accidents because they didn't properly disclose in some of the airplane flight manuals to the pilots what was going on in the computers. We don't have time to get into that on this podcast, but obviously me being a pilot, that's kind of near and dear to my heart, what all has been happening to Boeing. But I do think, to your point, John, I think Boeing will get this turned around. You could potentially view this as a buying opportunity if you're an investor in Boeing or considering it. Because I do think they'll get it turned around. I think for the national defense sake, for our transportation industry's sake, you can't afford it right now. I mean, you think about it. Right now, you've really only got 2 options when it comes to airline transport, right? Airbus and Boeing.
Yep.
That's another issue we could talk about.
Right,
Is
another
that healthy?
podcast.
Is that healthy for lack of competition? It's not, right?
It's not healthy. It's just such a big.
It allows companies like Boeing's to cut corners and to not focus on quality and safety because, I mean, who else are you competing with?
Exactly.
So that's a whole other issue for another podcast. But
We've got 3 so far.
But I do think they'll get it turned around, and I do think it's perhaps a good buying opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm rooting for them to get it turned around for our safety.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, for everyone's
For
sake.
everyone.
Exactly.
Anytime
The
we sit down in
flying
a plane.
public safety.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, hey, moving towards housing. So housing, it's been an awesome story. One that's benefited many people and hurt many other people, depending on where you sit in the housing buying or purchasing or owning stage. So going back 2021 into 2022, housing just soared through 2021. 2022, rates started increasing and people started to think, well, housing's going to crash. And it did. It went down a little bit in 2023. We've seen housing kind of come back. The report from the Commerce Department on Monday also showed the median new house price last month was the lowest in more than 2.5 years, while supply was the highest since November of 2022. Builders are ramping up construction while offering price cuts and other incentives, as well as reducing floor size, so making housing smaller.
That's the key. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Most of the new homes sold last month were in the 300 to 390, which is less than the national average, if I remember that right.
It is. Yeah.
The government reported last week that housing completions hit their highest level in 17 years in February. More new home supply in the pipeline, which could further dampen house price inflation. So, guys, thoughts on this?
So I think it's a natural course of action when two things. if you have a rate of 3%, 3.5, don't get out of that house. Right? Don't go from that house to another if you're going to have to borrow money and go and get 6.5%. It doesn't make any sense, right? From a financial planning side of things. So you've got a lot of people that are not going to sell their homes. That's number one. So that's going to lead to more building, right? Because you're going to get new homes, you're going to have new housing. But the other funny thing that's been happening, as we know in Northwest Arkansas, square footage of homes, young people, I just blew me away in the 2020 young couple with one kid going and buying a 4,000 square foot home. But they're getting 3% rate or 2021 or
They
2.
could.
Yeah, you could afford it.
Yeah.
Now the builders are smart, wising to the market, and they're lowering the square footage. Now you're 2,000 and under, which is the sweet spot for, it's about how much a payment can you afford. Mm-hmm. So you have to do something, right? So lowering the square footage of the house is a natural kind of event to happen when prices aren't going down to the levels they were and interest rates aren't going down. So that part doesn't surprise me. And home builders are smart. They're going to make as much money. They're making more per square foot than they were in the previous times. So it's good and bad. I think still young people are going to have a challenge. I've said this on this show before. Not every young person, but a lot of our middle class and under, and a lot of the youth are going to have a hard time in the near term here until interest rates get a little better. And because even the price of average home sold was $400,000, that's far above where it was in 2018, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So until we get to those levels and we get interest
Yeah.
rates down, it's going to be hard. But hopefully that's a short-term problem. You know,
I'll take a little bit of a different direction on this. Yeah. I go back to the demographic thing. I just think you can explain so many things demographically. I mean, at what age and stage of life are people typically buying first homes and replacement homes? First homes,
25
how old were you?
20. I was 23.
23, so maybe
Younger.
a little bit younger
He's
than
younger
average,
than average,
but probably 25, 26 for a first home. And then replacement homes probably 10 years after that, maybe, something like that. So you look at birth rate trends 25 to 35 years ago. If you see those birth trends in that demographic or in that age range, flat or declining, guess
that's
what?
going to trend out to
That's going to trend out to lower demand, which is going to cause prices to go down. And so that's a concern, frankly, that I have.
Yeah.
Is just looking at birth rate trends post 1992.
Yeah.
And how's that going to translate to housing demand? And when I talk about that, I'm talking about like demand across the country. You will always find pockets like Northwest Arkansas. We do this podcast here in Northwest Arkansas. I think the real estate market here is going to be healthy for the foreseeable future just because you've got people, let's say, immigrating in here. That's the wrong term, but you know what I'm saying, right? People are moving here because for a lot of good reasons, and they're fleeing some of the states that have bad leadership, right? That's part of it, but there's a lot of reasons. There's jobs here, the economy's booming here. So you'll find pockets like Northwest Arkansas where housing is going to continue to be strong for the foreseeable future. But nationally, I think you can you can make a lot of educated guesses on where housing might be going based on demographic birth rate trends 25 to 35 years ago.
Right.
One thing that I've been talking about over and over with clients, especially with young clients, is with the current interest rate environment and with how expensive housing is versus renting right now, if you are going to buy, your expected hold time for that house should just be longer. Whereas 2-3 years ago, you could say, well, let's buy a house, a couple years, maybe move.
Right.
Because it didn't cost you anything to move, and housing was going up at such a rapid pace. Whereas now, I don't think anyone's expecting to see a 25% increase in housing like we saw.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's more expensive to get in.
That's
Your
right.
holding costs are more expensive.
The pinch is where young people rents have gone up, and that's a scary thing. Apartment
It
rents
is.
have gone up, and if you rent a house, it's gone up. So if you want to live somewhere, right? It's always best if you can get into a house because you build equity and you have your home.
Absolutely.
So that's always the best route. And rents, there was a little time there where housing was kind of exploding and rents weren't keeping up, and so you could. You could kind of have both and be okay and build and save for that. And now the rents have come and kind of caught up and the houses kind of come down. So there's a band there where hopefully interest rates and hopefully prices will come down a little bit to kind of bring more people to the game. But it's still, these numbers are telling us it's not an unhealthy market. I mean, the builders are making money, the houses are moving.
Yeah.
So it's,
At least
like
right
you
now.
said, some people are benefiting and some other people aren't. But yeah, and it's cyclical. It will come back.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, final thing is, we love when we have comments on these videos on the shorts. If there's anything that you agreed with or disagreed with today, we would love to hear some comments from you. Last week we had a comment from a viewer. He said, inflation is still with us and it has the potential to become a bigger influence on how people see the economy. I imagine most people have already done what they see as the easy stuff to combat the effects of inflation. Things like switching to store brands, moving their shopping to Walmart or Aldi, using coupons, maybe even taking a lunch instead of eating out. The next steps might be harder and have a greater impact on lifestyle and the view on economy. It may be small comfort if the report says the cost of cars is down and that lowers the CPI, but folks buy groceries and eat out every week, but not cars. For them, the CPI is still rising.
It's a great comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
it's
completely
true.
agree. We've
It's
actually
real.
seen, and it's funny that he mentions the used car market or just cars in general. We've seen car prices going down. If you look at almost every brand, new cars and used cars, the prices have shifted lower. Tesla being a perfect kind of base case scenario. Tesla's prices have dropped drastically from a couple years ago to today.
Yeah, that's great for everybody except for those who have a Tesla.
Yeah.
Who bought it at the higher prices. I look at this and I say, this is dead on. How many client meetings have we had, and the clients are feeling the pinch.
Yes.
And they're going out to eat.
Yeah.
I mean, I just talked to somebody that went and got a Whataburger. I don't go to Whataburger, but they went and got a shake at
Good
Whataburger. It was like
clarification.
$6.
Yeah.
It was like, he goes,
Yeah, it's
my
crazy.
shake was $6.
It's
I'm like,
crazy, I know.
so everything, even little things have gotten more expensive. And you know what's funny about when you watch like an oil crisis and oil prices go up, there's a hurricane or something, it's really hard for the prices to come back down. And I think that's the same thing happening,
100%.
these companies that cereal, everything. It's hard to bring the prices down, even if they should.
Yeah.
Right. Even if the
they get
dynamics
used
are
to-
telling them they could.
They get used to that higher revenue and And in fact, to get prices back down, you would across the board, you would have to have deflation.
Right.
Deflation is not good, right? Because
Right.
then people stop buying because they keep waiting for the price to go lower and lower and
Exactly.
lower. Well, I'm not going to buy this week because maybe it'll be lower next week or next month.
Right.
And that creates a recession or depression. right?
Exactly.
So the Fed doesn't want. I mean, the Fed's worst enemy, worst nightmare, you might say, is deflation.
Right.
But that's the only way you get prices back down. So when you hear on the news, well, inflation is coming back down to the Fed's target, it's still going up.
I
Prices
know.
are still going up.
It's
They're
just not as fast.
Yeah, we're not going to get back, I don't think,
I agree.
unless we have major recession. We're not going to get back to the prices that we used to have.
I agree. Do you remember when this whole started with the interest rates and the Fed was raising rates and they said they were going to raise rates until inflation got to 2%.
Yeah.
Back down to 2%. And
Yeah.
of course, that seems like they have forgotten that statement. Because I remember our chairman said, even if it pushes into a recession. Our
Yeah.
biggest concern is getting inflation back to 2%.
Yeah.
I worry that it's an election year, and I think they've fallen off of what their true charge was, which means that I think there's all these kind of things we don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But I do know prices are going to stay high until something.
And you
happens.
said earlier about the housing market being cyclical.
Yeah.
Everything is cyclical.
Everything is,
really,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even this
Yep.
inflation stuff,
Yep.
because people do tend to vote with their wallets. Inflation is one of those things that you can't politically get around. Everybody that buys groceries and buys food, everybody that eats, feels inflation.
Exactly.
And you can't hide it. You can't.
Yep.
You can't ignore it politically. And so I do think, and I would even say I hope that people do vote with their wallets and they vote for a change, because this, you can't always place the blame for economic problems on the administration that happens to be in power, but
Right.
certainly they own some of it.
And they always take the blame, regardless if it's, COVID happens. We were on a huge upswing in the economy. COVID happens.
Yeah.
Trump took the blame
Yeah.
for that downturn and everything, whether that was his real fault or not. It doesn't matter. The president in charge takes the blame, just like the CEO of Boeing had to resign.
That's right.
So.
Well, hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button below and comment. We appreciate your comments. It's good for us to have new and fresh
Absolutely.
discussion, and to hear what other people are thinking than just us. So if you like this, please click the like button below, and maybe click the subscribe button, if I can say it right. Well, thanks for joining us on The Market Moment. We look forward to having you next week.